Hello, everyone. Welcome to my latest live stream. It's been a little bit of time since I've done one, but I'm happy to be here. I want to answer your questions, whatever questions you have about anything related to software. Maybe you want to start teaching online, which is an amazing career path as well, regardless of software. Whatever it is that you're looking to get answered. So, one of the things that I really wanted to talk about initially, hopefully to get some questions spurring, but it's something that I've been thinking about a lot, is something that Chet Holmes said in his book, The Ultimate Sales Machine. Now, Chet Holmes passed away years ago, and he's really one of the guys that helped Charlie Munger in the early days. So I believe, if I remember correctly, anyways, he said it's not about doing 10,000 things or 12,000 things. It's about doing 12 things over and over again and doing that incredibly well. And that's actually how you can basically accomplish anything. And I look at like some of the most successful people, and I think we can identify this as being true, like narrow down everything that most of these people's activities are. A lot of them that probably fall into those 12 buckets or like 12 things that they're doing over and over and over again. Um, anyways, that's just something to sort of ponder right now, as we're like navigating things. And I think about this a lot too because I want to do so many things and I get caught up in trying to do too many things, and therefore a lot of things sort of slowly progress instead of going as fast as I want them to. Nevertheless, my name is Justin Mitchell. If you didn't know that already, feel free to hit me up on Twitter at Justin Mitchell. Shoot me questions there as well as in the comments or the live chat, either one. The goal for me with questions is to, well, hopefully answer your question, number one, but also to better understand what it is that I should be thinking about as well in terms of software and building all sorts of things. But anyways, I see that some of you are on here, so I'm going to jump into the comments, and looks like my little text editor thing is not showing the comments, which is really fun. Okay, so yeah, that's strange. I've got my comments. Let me see if I can pull them up. And very odd. They should be on my little, I should be able to pull them up in these little banners here, but it's just not coming up. All right. So I got this thing, but that doesn't do anything for me. None of the comments are showing up, but I do see that you guys are talking. So I'll just respond to you. Hey, everyone. How's it going? What's up? Hello from India. Thanks for coming out. Do I feel imposter syndrome and how do I deal with it? This is a good question, ML Pack. I really wish I could show it on the screen. This is incredibly frustrating. Maybe if I opened up a new StreamYard thing here, let's see if this works, because this is a really good question and definitely worth something talking about, right? So we definitely want to talk about this particular one. And yep, questions are not coming through, but duplicate sounds might have just been coming through, and sorry about that. Okay, so imposter syndrome, absolutely. So the thing is, if you don't feel qualified to do something, then you might have this feeling of imposter syndrome, like I shouldn't be here. But the thing is, that's where all of the growth is, which is really interesting, is when you feel this imposter syndrome, hopefully what it does is it compels you to learn as much as you possibly can so that you don't feel like an imposter anymore. And then you get promoted or you take on a new challenge and then you feel like an imposter again, right? So read books, right? So I am obsessed with deep learning, in the sense that I think it's an incredibly fascinating topic. I think it's something that is going to impact our lives for the future, for a long, long time. And I don't think that I know enough to really fully articulate it in the way some of these other people that I read from do. And so I continue to learn. And I think that's a big way of how I deal with the feeling of imposter syndrome, is just learning more, so that I don't feel as, let's say, inadequate to the task at hand. And I actually probably know more about deep learning than the vast majority of people in the world. Not necessarily the vast majority of expert deep learners, definitely not, but I definitely am up there, or at least I think so. So, anyways, thanks for the question. Very good, ML Pack. Thank you. And I will say, if you guys have questions, and hopefully I'll get to all of them. I'm not sure if I will. We'll find out. But if I don't get to your question, definitely come out to the next live stream. I'm going to put them right here on YouTube. So cfe.sh/live will bring you right here. But then also, if you haven't already, I'm assuming that if you're watching this, you've already subscribed. So maybe check that out as well. It's really frustrating that I can't get the comments on screen. That is too bad. Maybe there's something with here. Just bear with me a second. Let's see here. If I save this, did that? Hopefully that didn't change anything with the live stream too much. But now maybe it's working. I don't know. You guys keep asking questions. I'll answer them as they come in, and I'll also repeat them. Okay, so Dodo Quack, that's a funny name. And also, hello everyone. Thanks for telling me where you are from and saying hello. Please keep saying that. I love hearing where you guys are from. It's awesome to see everyone from around the world on here. Technology is amazing, and this is a big part of the reason why. Okay, so how can you implement a appointment application app, Django and Django REST framework, but hesitate about the front end? Is the calendar too outdated? Is React Calendar too complex? Oh, yes. Now I'm getting all of the questions. I fixed it. What a silly bug. Okay, so how do you implement an appointment app? There's a lot of different ways on how to do this, and I would spend time on the logic inside of Django to make sure that there's no conflicting appointments in your database. The front end, how it actually is displayed, there's a lot of things that you could do with that. And if you don't React, definitely go that route. I think HTMX, if you're not familiar with HTMX, oh man, it's so cool. So check out HTMX because this tool right here will help you with dynamicness and just rendering templates or Django templates, or well, you can also use it on Fast API and Flask, so Django templates as well. Instead of worrying about a REST API and some sort of JavaScript to consume it. So that's how I would do it. I would actually absolutely go that route. And I don't think that Django's calendar stuff or any of a lot of the front end calendar like select tools are there's a lot out there. So it's hard to give you exact advice on that. You love my Django e-commerce project. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Thanks for watching. If you want to become a Django developer, should you go for training at an institute or YouTube tutorials is enough? I mean, it depends on how you learn for sure, but I think what it comes down to is what's going to make you that much more committed, right? So if you pay, let's say, I don't know, $5,000 to learn it from somewhere, hopefully you're going to be incredibly committed to invest that amount of money. And so, yeah, you could absolutely go that route if that's the type of person you are. The other thing is when you pay that much, there's a high level of expectation. Of course, even more than that too. But like if you pay more than that, there's a high level of expectation of the other party's involvement, right? So if you're paying a teacher a lot of money to teach you something, then you sort of expect that they're going to help you a lot. All of that expectation goes down as the dollars go down, right? Because you're not investing as much capital to help pay for their time or whatever it is that they're doing. That being said, YouTube tutorials, you can learn everything you need to learn from YouTube. I have a bunch of stuff on Django, of course, so I'm super biased on that. And yeah, you can definitely learn everything you need to know about Django on my website. The one big benefit of investing any sort of capital is usually the courses, all of those things are laid out, whether it's on an institute or somebody else's courses, it's laid out as like, here, this is what you need to do to learn. That's it. So YouTube tutorials do that as well in some degree, but perhaps not always to the depth that paid courses do. But also if you pay for it, humans were very loss adverse. So like paying any amount of money, you're like, oh, I don't want to waste that money. So I got to get my money's worth. That's where paying for it as well. And hopefully gives extra motivation too. Let's see. What is good? Learning Django or DSA? I'm not sure what DSA is. Let me just check real quick. DSA. Yeah, this is not something that I know or have heard of. DSA. I feel like maybe I should know it, but I'm not seeing DSA anywhere. Maybe you mean Django REST framework, but I don't know if that's the case or not. Hey, UK. Nice. Whereabouts in UK are you? Let me know. I'm curious to find out where all of you guys are. Let's see here. Every time I change to banners, the comments scroll down. Hello. What's the best path for learning machine learning? There's a lot of different paths. I think pick a project that you're interested in and go and try to make that project happen. Now, I would probably recommend not doing generative things out of the gates. I would recommend that you do categorizing of things. That is like categorizing if something's spam or not. I have a course called the Hello World of Machine Learning that does that. So you definitely could check that out. Um, but of course, you probably want to know a little bit about how to write code as well. And I recommend Python for that because Python's so well used in data science, not just because I teach it. Okay, so you're making a REST API for a social network. Do I need to make a front end? If you're going to have an actual social network, then yes. But if you're just working on the REST API, no, you could definitely do it in many different ways. I'm doing well. How are you? You having lots of basic applications or one fully developed one and professional one. So Julian, I'm assuming that you mean like to get like further along, right? Like in your career, I'm guessing, like building your portfolio. I think you want to have a wide spectrum. So a lot of basic ones that are well done is great. A lot of like advanced ones that are like complex and really well done is also great. So the point is you want to make quality eventually, but if you don't know how to make quality yet, then just make a lot of them as a do quantity. Am I hiring? Not currently. Thanks for the question. Please, you haven't been able to pass through basic CRUD and Django. Any project to test my skills? Yeah, check out my Try Django series here on YouTube. I also have your first Django project on Amazon as a course that you can buy as well. And yes, it's a course on Amazon, which is pretty cool. So yeah, like the basic CRUD is basically you're going to learn Django models. That's essentially what you're trying to learn there, as far as the topic is concerned. Just so you know. Thank you, Patuk. Sorry if I spelled you or mispronounced your name. Django project is great. I've absolutely tried to find other things in other languages that actually do Django's job better, and I've yet to find it in the way it's simple but also incredibly effective. So yeah, Django blows my mind still too. Do I ever want to work in big tech firms like Fang? I have no interest in working in a big tech firm, uh, partially because of politics, right? So there's a lot of politics involved in bigger organizations. There's politics involved in pretty much any organization, but like the posturing and maneuvering and all that, not interested in it. I'm also not interested in being managed or being boxed into certain kinds of workflows. I'm assuming that working at Fang would be like that. That is Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Google. If you weren't aware of Fang, so like I like there's definitely parts of it where maybe that's not completely true, right? So just because you're in a big organization doesn't necessarily mean it's like a big organization. But typically speaking, I would rather work for myself, which is what I do, because then I get to pick what I work on and I get to stick with that. That's actually the main thing, not the politics as much, because like uh, that is just something that doesn't really interest me. So it wouldn't be something that I'd play with anyway. Anyway, Nova Scotia, nice. Nigeria, welcome. From Washington, Nelson, hello. Where in Washington? I have family in Spokane. Have we ever talked before? I feel like we might have. You look familiar, or at least your name does. Yeah, Washington's the Pacific Northwest. It's a beautiful place. How can you be patient in yourself when you're learning a new thing and hit a wall, whether it's a learning curve type situation or external pressure? Oh, yeah. Yeah. You answered the question, I think, in your question. You just have to be patient with yourself. You have to understand that you're not going to learn everything right now, right? So I have 3 young kids, and you see this in children all the time. And you probably remember this as a child as well. Maybe when you were learning how to ride a bike or play a sport for the first time, maybe you remember it being a little hard and maybe not as fun as it could be. Um, but I think all of us, we want to learn it right now, right? Like network Chuck, you got to learn this right now. Totally think that there's some validity to getting the momentum going to learn something right now. However, the timeline, if you're committed to learning it, what does it matter if it takes you 10 years to learn it? In 10 years, then perhaps you are among the experts in the world. That's amazing, right? That's among what, about 8 billion people. You're an expert in that field. I think the thing is, there's an urgency of learning it right now, and maybe part of that is like missing out of on something, or you feel like you need to provide in some way, or maybe you feel inadequate if you don't learn it right now. um, those things are feelings that are valid, absolutely. But if you're committed to something, those feelings start to matter less and less. At least that's how I feel about it. What do I think about the hiring process and the job market, generally speaking? Why do no one want to accept juniors, but rather mid level? Yeah. So the thing is, when it comes to start being working in professional environments, you want to know that who you're working with is going to be there, right? They're going to show up and they're going to be able to do their job or figure it out. Junior level of anything needs a lot more hand holding. Not, maybe not always, but a lot more hand holding a lot of times, right? And maybe you're not that person. So this hand holding, what I mean by that is you have a lot of questions. Maybe they're great questions, right? But your manager or your teammate is busy themselves, right? So these types of questions, if they're questions that are like great questions but should be asked in a different setting, like in school or on a live stream, like those things, most people want to try to avoid, unless of course they're actively trying to teach, right? And like I am. But if you were asking me this question and we're like on a deadline, let's say for instance we're on a deadline for a big project and it's due tomorrow, and you're like, "Hey, how do you do Python regular expressions again?" I would be like, "What? Like, why? Like, why are we backing up?" It kind of halts things to some degree. And so when you think of someone who's like mid senior or just basically above a junior, um, there's a really good chance that they know how to navigate some of these questions on their own, and thus being able to like push the project forward, whatever it might be. So if I handed you a task and you're like, "Oh, I could definitely do this," but then you get stuck and you're like, "Oh, I need to ask Justin 1,000 questions about it," that might sound like you're being ambitious, but it's also wasting or potentially wasting that person's time that could be working on more impactful activities that might be more important to the bottom line. And so somebody who's a little further along, it's probably a lot easier to deal with that. So the question then is, how do you actually make yourself closer to what a non-junior is like? And this comes from asking a lot of questions, asking yourself a lot of these hard questions, and getting good questions comes from having a lot of experiences in building a lot of things. Hopefully that answers your question. um, so you have a lot of basic applications. Oh, you already asked this, I think. Julian, yes, please ask that question one time. I realize you want to get your question answered, but we've got an intimate group right now, so it's totally okay. We don't have to uh, keep on asking the same question. What's the best method to deploy Django applications? So this is a tricky one because best is relative to what your skill set is in many cases, but the least complicated is probably going to be through um, some sort of platform as a service, right? Whether that's DigitalOcean App Engine, Fly.io, Render. I'm trying to think of ones that I'm like now becoming a fan of versus what I used to use, which is Heroku. The reason I shy away from Heroku these days is because they did a big old bait and switch on software developers, uh, but it's still a pretty easy way to deploy. Basically, you're going to push your code in and it'll do a lot of work for you. Now, the best method would be one that you maybe aren't using a platform as a service, because those start to get expensive. Not always, but they start to get expensive. So learning how to manage more things, and I would say like possibly Kubernetes, or getting to that point where you're using Docker and Kubernetes, would be like the method I would choose for bigger projects. Poetry or pip env? VENV, the built-in virtual environment manager itself. I used to like pip env a lot, but it had a lot of dependency issues that I kept on running into that just made it not worth it. And then poetry itself is like completely different than pip. So it's like such a diversion, and maybe it's really good in some ways, but I teach a lot, so I need something that's going to be here for a long time and is sustainable and will most likely work the same way for a long time. So I use VENV, the built-in Python one. So I don't know what DSA is. You guys got to tell me what DSA is. Will AI take over a web developer job in the future? It's going to augment our jobs as a web developer, but what's the time horizon? If we're talking 100 years, probably this what we do today in 20 years probably won't even look the same at all, thanks to AI. But I think it's going to be similar to like, did predictive text on your cell phone replace your communication with other humans? Not yet. Maybe soon. How to build an online code editor using Django. That is a top. That is quite the question. I don't have advice for you right now because there's a lot to it. There's a lot, but it could be done. It definitely could be done with Django. I noticed that most Django and Celery tutorials do not cover workers, and is used heavily in production for how can I get up to speed with task servers, background workers, and task queues. So I cover Celery in time and tasks too on my website, and it has few blog posts, and it does have workers in there. So I'm not sure what you mean by workers. Do you mean um, like, because Celery itself is essentially a background worker? It also has a beat server, which means that you can schedule things, kind of like cron. So I'm not sure what you mean that most of the Django Celery tutorials don't cover workers, because everything you mentioned after there is essentially Django and Celery. That's what Celery does is manage all of these things. So yeah, pretty interesting. Excuse me. So let's see here. A lot of the same questions. Thank you, Julian. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Means a lot. Uh, cool. Let's see. So you're an accountant. Ah, yes. Okay. So how do you get into deep learning? So how well do you know Excel? And if you know Excel really well, then you can learn Python and pandas, because you'll take a lot of the things that you do in Excel and bring it into Python software development. Once you know pandas, then you can start learning, data engineering. Basically, putting your data in a form that deep learning can then learn. Deep learning, then the fast.ai, or really just deep learning for coders from Jeremy Howard, literally on my desk reading it because it's great, is what I would recommend. Jeremy Howard also has a bunch of videos on deep learning in general that I think is definitely well worth your time. You might want to learn machine learning techniques, which is not just deep learning, but if you're wanting to get into deep learning, I think that's a reasonable path to take, if you ask me. Let's see. So, should you learn Django or data structures and algorithms? This is what you mean by DSA. Is this the new acronym? I always hear data structures. Um, so you definitely want to know data structures. You want to know what the different ones are. You don't have to know all of the different algorithms. That I don't think is nearly as relevant to learn Django to build real projects. But it's not going to hurt you. And I believe there's a really good GitHub repo for data structures and algorithms on Python. That's really funny. DSA. I'm gonna have to remember that. It's 2022 and there's a lot of competition out there. Where do I see Django in 2025? So we got to remember something that Django does really, really well, which is it manages our data really well, right? So data for our web applications. So within that, our data for web applications includes like, how do we get users' data and put it into a database? If that's all Django did in the future, then we would be in a really good place, because there are alternatives to doing what I just said in Python. SQL Alchemy is one of them. MongoDB is a whole nother one that does those things well to a degree. It definitely stores data really well, but managing users is not something that any particular database does. MongoDB is a database. SQL Alchemy doesn't have built-in native support for user management either. But the fact that Django does makes it so much easier to assign a user securely to data. And so I think in 2025, we'll definitely still see a lot of Django for that reason. And then it sort of abstracts like the challenge that comes into managing all of those things. So of course, Django does many, many other things than just that. But the reason I think that we'll see this for a while is because of those two things. Um, Now, many people might argue, oh, but what about services like that manage these processes for you? Yes, those still exist and those are still valid, but those are services. It's not open source software. Services like to come and go, and they also like to, cap developers at the knees every once in a while. And that's why open source is still alive and well. And there's tools that are on Linux that have been around for decades that aren't going anywhere because they're still like fundamental to making sure the internet works. Not to say that Django is fundamental necessarily, but as far as web development is concerned, I think we'll see it for a long, long time. There will be other ones that come up that help solve different issues that Django doesn't necessarily always address right away. But we'll start to see a lot of those things being addressed as they become more and more popular. 30-minute miles from Cambridge. Cool. I have never been. I wonder what city it is. Golang with Django. Okay, so yeah, Golang and Django are sort of like, I mean, there's ways to make Golang work with Django, but like the vast majority of us talking here aren't going to be doing that, right? So yeah, I think a big part of this is realizing that you can optimize things on the server side with the Golang with Go language. Absolutely, but it's not going to run Django as far as I know. Maybe there's a way to do it, but that's going to replace a Python runtime of some kind, which I don't know if that makes sense either. So yeah, like fast execution with a database, Django doesn't have a problem here. Um, Maybe your servers or the services that you're using has a problem with it, but like Instagram still runs with Django, which assumes that the execution is great. Hey, I'm sorry that you are feeling this way. I don't want anyone to be suicidal. I definitely hope that you call someone and get help. That's my hope for you. That's pretty much it. Unemployment is devastating for sure, but definitely call and talk to somebody. Um, and hopefully, what they'll tell you is that it will get better. You will get through this. Yeah. Dan Fan, you loved my videos a while back in implementing Bootstrap theme in Django. It's really helpful. I'm glad to hear that. Bootstrap is great. I still really like Bootstrap. I know Tailwind's like the popular thing right now, but like Tailwind, I just haven't given it enough due. Maybe I'll change my tune about that as well at some point. How's Django's future? I just sort of touched on this. I think it's great. I think, like what I said a few years back about Django, I think we'll see a lot more of as well, because the demand for managing users and data is not going away anytime soon. Perhaps we will see some sort of Django replacement where it's a full-on framework like Django. Fast API is not a Django replacement, nor is it trying to be. If you might be like, oh, well, what about that? So when building a SaaS, should I use Django REST framework and a front end framework, or should I stick with Django templates? Yes. Great question. I think it comes back to using HTMX with Django. HTMX removes the complexity of needing to write the Django REST framework and a front end all together. And you could just stick with the Django templates. That is what I would do when building the first version, maybe several iterations of that. You can still use a front end framework. You can still use the Django REST framework, but then you have to use it sparingly. And then the performance can be great. The performance can always be great if it's done correctly. So baked into that assumes a lot of knowledge. Whereas when you start to say, oh, I'm going to use Django, I'm going to use the Django REST framework, and then I'm going to use like React.js or Vue, all of that sounds so cool. And the like learning that's there is amazing. I really recommend the learning if that's what you're after. But if you're trying to build something, a real project, a real business, then you need to get customers, you get users using it to tell you, hey, this doesn't work well, or this works really well, or I like this feature, or you can also monitor all of those things. And then you can continue to refine, and perhaps that refinement leads you to some sort of front end framework. Are you working on any new comprehensive Django tutorials? So yes, there is a huge one that I'm working on that has matchmaking in it, or rather recommendation engine in it. So it has machine learning in it. This is a comprehensive recommendation engine for Django, a little bit more advanced than, let's say, for instance, my other like beginner type full, comprehensive Django tutorials. But as far as like the absolute basics, try Django 3.2, I think still covers that really well. So if you are looking for some of the fundamental things, check out Try Django 3.2. If you want to see some more of the advanced stuff, check out the Recommender series on my website. It's coming out really, really soon, and that will also be sold on Amazon as well. So definitely check that out when it does come out. Thank you. I'm glad you learned a lot. I really appreciate it, Julian. What's my opinion on quantum computing? I don't have a strong one because I haven't spent enough time learning about it, but it sounds incredibly interesting and might be the next breakthrough in just computing in general. And therefore, we'll see we'll see the change of everything, right? Like like Django might be eliminated completely because of that. You know what I mean? So you're trying to learn web development. But you remember Web3 and all this stuff about blockchain and decentralized systems. Yeah, so Web3 is definitely a shift away from like software and web development as we know it today. That doesn't mean they can't interoperate, they can't use things together, like Coinbase, which is a popular place to buy and sell cryptocurrency, and store it as well. That has a web application, right? It's not a Web3 application only. It's a full on web application to work with all that. So I think pick your interest and start building stuff. That's really it. I really like the concept behind Web3. I think maybe we're still early days with it because it's still very volatile, but it's definitely interesting. Express.js or Django? Django has a lot of batteries included. Express.js is minimal. It has basically nothing. I think a better comparison between a JavaScript framework and a Python framework would be, of course, Express.js and Fast API. Those, they're both really good. I tend to prefer Python on the back end, on the server side, so I tend to give Fast API the edge there. Hey, you feel disappointed. Sorry to hear that. I hope your day gets better. My biggest issue is learning correct deployment. Have you touched base on this topic? Forgive me if you have. Yes, I talk about deployment a lot. So check out my website and do a quick search for deployment or production, and you can see all sorts of things on that. Deployment is super, super fascinating, and I will have a lot more discussions on it in the near future. So yeah, definitely check out that topic on my website. Future is bright with Django. Going back to that question, I realize now I'm like 15 minutes behind, so I might have to scroll up a little bit. You're in Seattle. Nice. I do like Seattle a lot. I think there's certain things that I don't like, which is true about any big city, Yeah. So yeah, didn't think you ask a lot of questions on your e-commerce course, which is awesome. Look forward to doing more. Great. That's awesome, Nelson. Let's see here. Hey, Juan from Brazil. You're studying Django classes on my YouTube. Thank you. Thank you for saying hi and all that. Yes, Julian, I got you. You asked twice. No worries. How to generate patient number card with Django. Like an ID card? Is that what you mean? You could use something called UUID. It's really nice to make. This is only in Python, though. It doesn't even matter if it's in Django. That's what I would do. And I would also probably use it in some cases as a primary key on Django. So there's that. There's a UUID field. Oh yeah, cool. I'm glad you guys are talking to each other. Function-based views or class-based views. If you have to repeat things over and over again, class-based views. If you need to do something quickly, function-based views. Sometimes class-based views for quickly as well. But I don't have a strong opinion all the time on both of them. I like them both. But if class-based views confuse you, just use a function-based view until you've rewritten the same thing over and over so many times that you're like, there's got to be a better way. That better way is class-based views. You're studying, and also there are some tools that require you to use class-based views as like their de facto standard. I think the Django REST framework is one of those things that are just like, hey, you should use class-based views. Yeah, you can use function-based views with it, but it's so much easier with class-based views. Anyways, studying mathematics currently. What branch of programming can I apply my math skills in? Data science. That's not the data science and machine learning. That's the way you should go. If I studied math, that's absolutely what I'd be spending my time on. Yeah, Andre Karpathy, the former head of Tesla's AI, is now doing a lot more YouTube tutorials. So check those things out. Definitely worth learning from him. Function-based views, you know exactly what you get. Well, class-based views, you'll know exactly what you get too if you know how they work. So that's funny. Sounds like you are all very, very interested in deployment, which is cool. Thank you for clarifying DSA. That is an acronym that is brand new to me, right? DS, as in data science, is something I hear all the time. So I was thinking data science and analytics, but I knew it wasn't that because I feel like you would have said data science. Anyways, I mentioned HTMX. Do you see this having an impact on the future of Django? Seems single page applications are still favored for everything when there are much better approaches. So I think that there's something interesting about a lot of these JavaScript frameworks and the dominance that they have. They are all owned, with the exception of Vue.js at this point, but the major ones, as in React and Angular. Vue.js is an example, but bear with me for a second. React and Angular are both owned by Google and Facebook, right? So Facebook owns React, Google owns Angular. So why is it that they have these tools out there? Like, what is the motivation for that? It's hard to say exactly, but other than knowing that people like they want to be known for those things. Whereas Django is I believe, a nonprofit organization. Vue.js is probably a nonprofit organization as well. So the thing that we have to understand here with open source is a lot of times it strips away complexity that's not necessary. And so when we look at something like front end frameworks, they provide a lot of value, or they can provide a lot of value. But some of the complexity that comes from them is a result of using them. And HTMX sort of removed that notion, right? So HTMX is still written in JavaScript, right? So it's still using JavaScript. So you could probably argue it is a JavaScript framework. But the thing is, the reason we started making REST APIs for our front ends is kind of almost nonsensical to me in some sense, right? Because like our web application can also serve our front end. So if you think about Django, that's absolutely what it does. And this is how old servers sort of worked before too. But then we decided to add layers of abstraction or complexity on top of it. And like then now our HTML is not rendered from the server. It's now rendered through a JavaScript framework, which maybe is really great. Maybe it helps performance, but whose performance is the question. Is it the website? Maybe. Is it the speed of information? Maybe, right? But if you create a website correctly, the optimizations that front end or single page application services don't necessarily always work out in that way, right? So in other words, let me rephrase it another way. If you are using, let's say, for instance, React.js as your entire front end, and your back end decided you want to implement a new feature. Now, what you have to do is you have to design that feature in your backend. You have to make sure it works with the database. You have to then map in a brand new REST API and all of the views that go with it, with all of the permissions. Right there, instead of doing a REST API, you could just implement the feature. HTMX allows for this, right? But going back to that example is now you have this REST API. Now you have to make all of those things in your front end framework, so React or Angular or whatever, and then you have to build your front end framework, and then you have to deploy all of those things. It starts to become a lot more complicated of a mess. HTMX just removes all of that. jQuery back in the day did something very similar as what HTMX is sort of doing, but Not exactly. Basically, it unlocked the ability to do Ajax in a much faster way than writing it pure. We could talk for days on this, but I still think there's a place for both of them, and they can live next to each other. I think HTMX is amazing. So yeah, class-based views all the way. You still have to look up function-based views. That's interesting. Very interesting. Is Docker always the only way to implement Celery and Redis in Django projects? No. Oh, absolutely. You could use systemd and supervisor. Supervisor, I think, is great for all sorts of things, um, but you don't have to use Docker for deployment. Uh, I definitely will touch on this in the near future in comprehensive detail, not necessarily for Django, but like how to deploy Python applications. So yeah, I think like as far as serving something that might be really interesting to you is I did a complete Python setup series course on Amazon. It's just on Amazon right now. But in there, I do virtual machines, and you can actually log in and start using a virtual machine as your development environment. So the thing is, if you could use it as your development environment, you could absolutely use it as your production environment as well. So that might be something worth going through. And then there's a lot of tutorials out there on how to take what you do in that course, or really just running Django and Celery on a virtual machine, and then actually turn it into a production workflow. Good question. But Docker simplifies it a lot, in my opinion. Of course, if you don't know Docker, then it doesn't, but it does simplify it. Hey, nice to meet you. Japan, that's awesome. Where in Japan? Hello, welcome. Thanks for coming out. Appreciate it. Best way of storing media files in Django production using some sort of object storage, whether that's AWS S3, whether that's Linode buckets or object storage, whether that's Google Cloud buckets storage. I'm going blank right now. Whether that's DigitalOcean Spaces, whether that's Azure buckets or whatever they call it. Object storage is the way to go, in my opinion, because you basically have unlimited amount of storage that you can add, and you can also lock it down really well. And then you can put a content delivery network on top of it if you need to. So it's not running, none of your media files would be near Django at all, any of the code or anything like that. It'll be a completely separate service altogether. There are ways to do your own object storage surface, but man, that is tricky. Very, very tricky. Oh yeah, so Windows prefetch method in Django abuse your database when you use it incorrectly. So if you're prefetching things that you don't need to prefetch in Django query sets, then you're going to start to overload your database too much, right? So you need there's a lot of good documentation on the Django docs on how to optimize prefetch. And I'm trying to remember who, maybe Adam Johnson also has something talking about prefetch in detail. But basically, you don't want to grab something you just don't need from your database. And if you do need it, prefetch is there, but you also don't need to grab everything too. Hopefully that helps. Yeah. So you're from Indonesia, in the country. Django vocation is a bit rather, so Laravel is probably bigger. So yeah, I'm not following your question. Should you take your time learning Django? I think so, even if you're with PHP and Laravel. All right, so I don't have that much time left, so I'm going to actually scroll to more real time. How much money do you make? That is quite the question, buddy. Is it wise to integrate Django with any of the JavaScript frameworks, or better to use Jinja? I just kind of touched on this, but you can use both, right? So Jinja or the Django templating engine can absolutely integrate with everything you need to. So there's a lot of different options there. In fact, if you're using Jinja, you're probably going to have to render your front end JavaScript right in there. Same with the Django templating engine. So if I skipped your questions, sorry about that. I think that super chat is probably answered or active. So feel free to do that if you desperately need your question answered right now. But I hope to do this more. So definitely let me know in the comments after this video is done if it's something you want to see more of in the future. If you want to be a part of these questions, these live streams and all that, just let me know. So you're building a website for a friend with a blog and booking appointments for art therapy. She won't need users. Django seems unnecessary. Yeah, Django is probably unnecessary. I agree with you. because like on one hand, yes, if you want to learn how to use Django, then do all of those things. But really, I would use Calendly, the app for booking, um, like actually booking, like appointments and stuff like that from your calendar. That is fantastic. And if you're doing a blog, I'm trying to remember what I'm using on my website for justinmitchell.com. I did not use Django. So if you go to my name, justinmitchell.com, let me just write it out here. So justinmitchell.com. I decided to start writing stuff there again. It's few and far between, but it's not necessarily always tech related. In fact, I am going to leave most of the tech stuff to codingforentrepreneurs.com or really cfe.sh. But this right here, if you go to the GitHub repo for this, you will actually see how I did my blog, my personal blog. And I'm trying to remember the GitHub repo as well. I think it's github.com/jmitchell3 and then justinmitchell.com. I think that's it right there. So you can check how I approach that blog there. And then I would use Calendly as a way to book your stuff. You know what I mean? Yeah. Hey, super sticker. Thank you. Appreciate it. Dodo Quack. Such a funny name. Let's see here. But yeah, so the thing is, the website part of things, like my personal blog right now is like not that great looking, but it works. It actually gets points across. So you can go there and you can read things, my thoughts from that's kind of the point of a blog, right? And so you can absolutely do that. Now, the reason I chose that method was so that I can have iterative version control of every blog post, right? So if I make a change to a blog post, I personally can go back and see all of those changes, which I think is pretty cool. Anyways, so does Django have good synergy with Solidarity or Solidity? Excuse me. The blockchain stuff. Django can work with anything that's Python related. So if Python can do it, yes. Django can also call other kinds of processes too. So yes, it's just like Django itself doesn't necessarily have native support for that. But if Python can do it, Django can do it most likely. It just depends on whether or not the virtual machine that you're running Django on has the ability to do all of those things too, meaning it has all the dependencies installed and all that. Hopefully that answers your question. We already did the media file thing. Let's see. What helped you understand and get a lot of experience around software engineering concepts and features that you have today? Building projects and answering questions, also trying to teach people this stuff helps a lot because you get questions like this. But if you're not interested in teaching per se, like vocally, I think writing blog posts, like guides for yourself that you just publish is really, really valuable because then you have to be very clear on what it is that you learned. Not to mention, it could help somebody else solve the same sort of problem that you have. So if you run into an issue, just run and make a blog post really quick. You could use medium.com. You could do the blog thing that I did above. There's a lot of different ways on how you could actually publish it. You could even just put it on GitHub too as markdown files or text files, whatever, however you want to do it. But yeah, I think that's how I got a lot of experience. It was just by building a lot of projects, answering a lot of questions to both people and to myself, the questions I asked myself, but also reading questions on Stack Overflow and stuff like that too. What's the oldest person you've seen get hired at entry level? Oh man, somebody contacted me. I think it was like 60. He switched careers and maybe even older than that, honestly. Switched careers and decided to start doing software. And yeah, I don't know how it's worked out for him, but he the reason I know about it is he hit me up to thank me. So it sounds like it worked out, which is cool. That's great. And if you are that person, please say hi again. I would love to hear from you. Any tips and things to take care of for someone who's getting started with software teaching? I got a lot of tips for a lot of things. Be specific, please. How to make a Django app more efficient with 100 million records in a database, like Fast API calling at least 1 million. If 100 million records, this is probably not an issue that you have. You're probably thinking about a hypothetical here. So what database? Postgres can absolutely handle 100 million records, right? And it can handle 1 million calls per day. but a single Postgres database running on one virtual machine is probably not going to do it, right? You would likely have to have a cluster with read replicas and all sorts of things, and have to optimize it for that. I don't know if this is a real question per se, because it seems like it might not be. Django can handle it. Look at Instagram. Look at Pinterest. There's a lot of big applications that run on Django, but of course, they don't all necessarily work off of what toy examples do. They probably use other databases as well, right? So you can use MongoDB and Cassandra inside of a Django application as well. It's just not going to work the Django MVT pattern or MVC pattern, or you won't use Django models essentially if you actually have that much data. You'll use other things in conjunction with Django. Just remember though, any software, anything that works with the internet can probably talk to other software that works with the internet. This is the rise of APIs. This is why API services exist, is to help handle load of things that are just enormous, right? And so my Django application, even if I stored no data whatsoever, I can absolutely use it to handle 100 million records. Those records wouldn't necessarily be in my database. They could be in all sorts of API services that are out there. It's important to note, I think. Okay, so any tips? Oh, hey, you got more specific. Thank you. To get started as a YouTube content creator, yes, do the shorts, do YouTube shorts, do TikTok shorts, and think of the short as a tweet. So you write out something really short. Hopefully it's succinct and tells everything. Then you go and you just do it. And you just keep doing it until you don't do it anymore. One of the things that I think will really help you stand out is by being consistent. A lot of people are like, hey, how come you don't have a million subscribers or something like that? If you look at how often I actually post on YouTube, it's not as consistent as the ones that post that have a million followers. If you're just consistent and you improve over time, you will absolutely be able to be a content creator of any kind, literally any kind, whether that's on YouTube, whether that's on Udemy, on Amazon, writing books, anything. If you're consistently doing it, you're bound to get better unless there's something wrong with you. Seriously, if there's actually something wrong with you, then perhaps you won't get better. But the vast majority of us will get better from doing quantity. So yeah, that I think is how you get better. Now, there's tactical things, of course. If you don't like being on camera, don't be on camera yet. Fireship, I'm trying to remember his name. I don't think he's ever been on camera. He has like 1.5 million subscribers, right? But contrast that with Network Chuck. He's on camera all of the time. I think there's not a time that he's not on camera, right? He's got 1 million subscribers. So there's definitely, you got to find the way that you do it. You might need to draw inspiration from other people for sure, because that's what we do as humans. But then you need to make it uniquely your own and not just copy someone else. Yeah, you know I mean, so yeah, cool. I got another super chat. Hey, thank you. You got your first job by my courses. This is awesome, man. Thank you so much. Is that your real profile picture? Because you look like you're a pretty young guy. And congratulations for getting your first job and going through my tutorial. I mean, it's a lot. That e-commerce thing has a lot on it. So yeah. Hey, you're welcome. Thank you. Thanks for coming out. Appreciate it. Let's see here. Oh yeah, I already answered that one. When using Celery and Redis in production, how can I keep the tasks in the queue and not delete them when we're starting or doing a new deploy? Aha, good one. You have Redis is going to be your task queue. Redis is what stores all of it, not Celery, not Django. Redis stores all of it. So if you have a production Redis instance running, which I would recommend if you don't want to manage it, I would recommend that you used a managed service for that. Absolutely. That way you will know it's most likely going to stay there. Now, Celery does start to purge these messages in Redis, but there is configuration that you can have to help eliminate the purge and the speed of the purge. So yeah, I've been using Celery and Redis in production for a really long time with Django as well, using roughly the same method. Like I don't manage the Redis data store or database myself. I use managed Redis, and then I also don't manage my production Postgres database either. I use a managed version of that as well. Celery and Django, I write all that because that's what I really like managing. Now, that doesn't mean I can't manage these other things. I know how to do it. It just adds complexity to a lot of the projects that I don't necessarily want to have, um, if that makes sense, right? But I mean, I was referring to my my coding for entrepreneurs website, of course, because that's the one that I work on the most and the one that I've had around the longest, and have done Django, Celery, and Redis in production the longest. Um, what languages do I recommend for microservice introductory courses? You're a Django dev. Okay, so the big question is, why do you need a microservice, right? That would be my first question. If you are sure that you need a microservice and you know Django, why not write it in Fast API, right? I actually do this in one of my tutorial series um, from maybe about a year ago, a little less, um, with Fast API and doing OCR. That's what does it stand for again? But it basically extracts text from images as a microservice, which I think should be a microservice because it's doing machine learning of some kind. And that is likely to potentially have problems. And also, you should focus just on that one thing for machine learning, especially. Is there something coming with PyScript and Django? Probably. PyScript is compelling. Writing Python in the browser, if you're not aware of PyScript, it's definitely compelling. And it also might be a really good tool to learn Python and Django. And somebody asked earlier about code editors. Maybe this would be a good way to do that as well. Okay, so is it better to become a backend engineer or full stack engineer? I think it's better to pick for yourself than me tell you. Um, but I think you should dabble in both. It sounds like you want to dabble in both, so you should dabble in both so you have a better sense as to what's going on. Um, the biggest question to me is, what is a full stack engineer anymore, right? Does this include machine learning? Does it include DevOps? Does it include, managing servers and all that? Um, eh, I'm starting to think yes, but that's probably not what you mean. However, you're going to have to figure out what you want to decide there for yourself. Thanks for the question. Yes. Okay. Oh, nice. You actually have. Wow. Good for you. Okay. So we talked about 100 million in database. Okay. You're running on a single DigitalOcean droplet. Wow. So you must have like vertically scaled a good amount on that droplet, I would imagine. So what I recommend that you do to handle the load is, first off, create a load balancer and have multiple droplets. Horizontally scale your service if you haven't yet, right? So horizontally scale your service, not touching the database. I'm assuming maybe the database is the thing that's running on a single droplet. If that's the case, I can't remember if DigitalOcean had the clusters or not. I personally would start to move all of that to a managed database cluster of some kind, because then it will help you also handle load on that side as well. And so one of the things that you can do to help with ensuring the efficiency is you can use multiple databases in Django so that your queries that get hit all the time work off of a read replica. If you're not familiar with what that is, a read replica is just literally a copy or an eventual copy of your database. I'm assuming you're using a SQL database because of this, but basically, if it's a Postgres database, you create a read replica, which is literally a replica of your original database, but it might not happen right away. It's like eventually it comes to the correct state. But that read replica then will allow you to help with your queries if there's a lot of them. Then, of course, using a cache store, something like Redis Cache, can also help speed up the responses in there as well. 40 million data points is probably not that many, but 100 million on a single DigitalOcean droplet, you're starting to edge towards, you definitely need something more robust, a more robust solution. So I would at least start with the read replica on another droplet for a number of reasons, one of them being failover as well. And then you could start going from there. Now, optimizing SQL databases itself is definitely not something that I am super qualified to answer because, well, I don't spend a lot of time trying to do this. But I think what I just said to you is a good way to start approaching those things. Wow, good for you. That's great that like I feel very humbled by the fact that you actually are working on that, because I get kind of left field questions all the time, these hypothetical things that a student is asked for their homework or something that I have to help. manage. And maybe you still are that, but it sounds like maybe you're not. Um, what is my strategy to learn any skill in programming or in life? Oh yeah, so usually it has to do with actually doing said skill, right? And deciding that this is going to be a part of my repertoire, but I commit to it, right? So whether it takes a week or 10 years, I commit to it. And I think that's like what you have to do. That's like my number one strategy. Next, a great book that summarizes this better than I could right now is Atomic Habits by James Clear. Read that book. I think that's a really great prescriptive guide to learning or making things habitual. And if you make learning habitual, then you'll be on the right path. One of the things that I think I need to get better at is having a proper schedule with certain times dedicated to certain activities, right? I, being that I'm maybe like an entrepreneur and creative, I tend to like, oh, I want to work on this right now. So I'm going to stop and then I'm going to work on this right now. It's part of the reason I don't like being managed. However, if you manage yourself and you manage your own schedule, that is probably a really good strategy to really help you be that much more successful. It's not that I don't have a schedule per se, but it's like could be more refined and more honed into achieving the things I want to achieve. And this is the stuff that I've learned from Atomic Habits, among many other things. But really, if you want it, like if you want to learn something or if you want to be something or become someone, um, just commit to it, right? Once you commit to it, your mind starts thinking about it all the time and you start finding ways to become more and more that thing. Um, Now it's about being that thing, not wanting to be that thing, right? That's the that's where some people get caught up, myself included. Excuse me. Any tips on how to land your first job? Okay. So you have solid knowledge. Sounds like you know some Django a little bit. Um, actually publishing your work that is on GitHub, that is writing blog articles, and doing that as a regular process for landing your jobs. Also, applying to all of the jobs that fit some criteria for you to go and get your first job, right? Now, the criteria to me has nothing to do with the salary. Ideally, it is a salary, though. I don't think taking an internship is always the best idea because you can intern yourself, as in you can write a bunch of articles, you can write a bunch of projects itself, and learn a ton from that without necessarily like taking someone else's time, right? And then once you have a established base or portfolio, then you can start applying to some of these junior level jobs and get them. While you're applying to a job, if you want an actual job, then keep applying and you might get rejected. Let's say you get rejected a thousand times. That's not too bad, actually, if you finally get a job, because then you finally get what you want. So if you're committed to it, eventually you'll get what you want. And if it takes 1,000 tries, hey, that's not too bad, right? You could probably think of 1,000 things that you did in the past week that don't matter much to you. Like how many times did you eat in the past year? Probably over 1,000 times, I'm guessing. Does it matter that much? Well, it sustains your life. You're committed to it. But if you miss a meal, you're not going to be like, oh man. But of course, that's a different analogy. Anyways, so I definitely recommend just putting your work out there and then also taking freelance gigs if you can. So getting actually paid to do something that a client wants can also help you get a lot better as well. And then the freelancing stuff, um, you don't have to charge a lot, right? You could charge practically nothing, but charge something because you are valuable, right? Like every person is valuable. So the fact that you don't necessarily charge is something that I would shy away from, even if it's $20, just something to be to have that other person committed, because free doesn't necessarily lead towards a whole lot, in my opinion. It's not the same as education. You can educate for free, but because it doesn't cost that much more to have things produced, anyways. What are the main difference between flannel and tearaway? I don't know. I don't know. Sorry, Rex. I haven't researched those, but I probably should. Uh, good questions though. Let's see here. Where did it go? Sometimes it's scrolling. How annoying is it new versions of Django appear every few months? Not at all. Knowing is like new versions of software is great. The only part that might be annoying for me personally is the fact that I teach and people are like, oh, I don't want to learn Django 1.11. It's not relevant anymore. That's the only part that's annoying about it, but it's not because of Django. It's because I like culturally we're not educated on where where things fit, right? Um, in the terms of versions. So versions maybe are really important, but maybe they're not. In the case of Django, it's not actually that important because the core of Django has remained the same for over 10 years, right? So the versions changing are actually just improving security, maybe adding a few features, but overall, Django is Django and it hasn't changed that much. So I actually think it's great that they add new versions and they make some changes because it's pushing all of us forward into making better and better software. And Django is like planting a flag every time it does because there's a whole ecosystem that sort of relies on Django that if Django doesn't move forward, that ecosystem doesn't either. And as developers, beyond students, we all win when Django moves forward, in my opinion. I think that the naming pattern, like 3.2 being the LTS, I would love that to change. I would love that to be Django 4 is what Django 3.2 used to be. Or I should probably talk in terms of Django 5. Like I feel like Django 5 should be the LTS. So then Django 6 is the next LTS. That I think would help clarify a lot of confusion with a number of Django developers. But that's just a like a nitty gritty thing. Because once you know the versions and how once you know Django and you go back in time, the versions don't matter that much in terms of learning. Um, how important is a degree in web development? Zero. Your skills are what's important, not your degree. Because the other thing is, how do you verify a degree? Like, yeah, maybe you got a degree at MIT in physics, but that doesn't necessarily mean you know how to code, right? Like, that's a great degree. You'll probably be able to learn how to code, but you don't know how to do it yet. So yeah, you still need to learn. And I think most universities do not teach the nitty gritty of web development. That's not always true, of course, right? But I would argue that's probably not always going to happen. That being said, it has been happening a lot more in the last 10 years, which is great. So perhaps you can get a degree in web development, but it's not the only path. There's a lot of books out there that you can learn how to do it. Yeah. How does a developer avoid burnout? Not overextending yourself. I think it's pretty simple. But like this is not an easy question to answer. But if you put systems in place to make sure that number one, you are getting rest, right? Number two, you're having fun, like beyond work, because work is fun. I love work. But like you have to like absolutely be disciplined about the things that aren't consuming your work life. Not every job is going to do that. So maybe you have to leave the job. But you'll know when you're starting to feel burnt out. You'll probably just need a break, or maybe you'll get sick. That's another thing. For an API in Django, which is good. Personally, I really like the Django REST framework. Ninja, I don't think I've used that one yet. Fast API is not Django, but you could definitely map your Django models to Fast API, whether it's SQL Alchemy or I think it's called SQL Model, if I remember correctly. You can absolutely have those mapped to the same database tables. That's okay. You know, if a client doesn't pay you money, then what should I do? Well, if you run their software and you have control over their software, you should remind them that maybe, I don't know. But if a client's not paying you money, just don't work with them again. That happens. That definitely happens in freelancing. And perhaps that is also a sign that you're not charging enough, right? So if you're charging a lot, you can demand 50%, maybe 25%, 50%. You can demand the money in increments as you release major milestones. Yeah. Somebody said sue them. Yeah, absolutely. That's another option. If you have a valid purchase order and invoice, you can absolutely sue them. That is a very, very, very good point. And of course, if you control their software, you can turn their services off, and that might help motivate that as well. Although I don't personally think that's a method you necessarily need to go to. Yeah. So, guys, I got a couple minutes here. Wow, this ended up being a lot longer than I anticipated. I feel like I say that on every live stream. I probably do. So I'll probably answer a few more questions and then I'll go. But thanks for coming out and asking a lot of good questions. Really appreciate it. About hopefully. Oh yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing. Um, Yeah, you learn from Django 90% from me. I'm curious where you learn the other 10, because there's a lot of good stuff out there, and I'm just thrilled to be a part of it. Really, so good for you. Good for you. So you're in California, you're in client UK refuses to pay money. What should I do? Yeah, I think we just covered this, but legally, there's not a whole lot you can do there. Um, but I mean, there's measures that you could take to protect yourself against that. Um, but then also you could email them and say, look, you haven't paid me. Since you haven't paid me, I'm going to open source all this code. Right. So then somebody can get benefit from the work that I've done. And then it's not a complete loss for me. If you want to pay me, you got a month to do so, or 2 weeks, or whatever. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, because if somebody's really taking advantage of you, yeah, you should probably make it very clear that there's ramifications for them taking advantage of you. Um, yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think? Is that reasonable? I don't freelance a whole lot anymore, because partially because of what you're talking about, and partially I love what I do now. I like teaching and researching and writing and building and coding on my own website. Those are the things I really like. So freelancing is not necessarily something I enjoy doing. However, I have done it. Yeah. Opinion on Django. Like, I've heard really good things. I've never actually needed to use it, so I don't have a strong opinion. Is there an interactive way to show what context variables are available at the template level? As in, related to what related objects are available for me to use and how to access them? Good question. So, one thing, template context processors in Django you can look at. I'll tell you a shortcut in a second. But if you look at the template context processors, you can see all of the context that will go into your templates, right? Obviously, what you render in any given view are also context variables that you'll have access to. There is one other thing, it's called locals. If you write out locals with an S and a parentheses and run that, assign that to a variable, you can hit a print statement and you'll see a lot of the locals that are coming through. But as far as the view is concerned, at least, but that also takes into account a lot of other things that are happening on your Python module itself. So I don't recommend doing that, but definitely going into the Django template context is what I would end up doing. Development tools I use to deploy Django, GitHub Actions. That is like my favorite one by far, and Docker and a number of other things as well, but GitHub Actions. So last question. How do I send emails in Django using Docker, using a email sending service like SendGrid? Yeah. Oh, you guys, couple more questions. Okay, Nelson. And let's see here. You mentioned a degree being less important in the long run, but if you're going for a first job, most companies want to see something. If so, is there something broad you'd recommend? Yes. Okay. So depends on what you're trying to do, right? If you want to work in computer science, maybe a computer science degree is a good idea. But I sort of assume that you're already at a point, like if you're asking me this now, if you're like about to graduate, there's probably no way you're going to change your major, right? Um, so like I don't know if anything I would ever say to you is going to change your trajectory if you're already in college per se. If you're already in college and you're about to try and get your first job, I would spend every weekend. You don't have to do it the whole weekend, but let's say 6 hours a weekend, 8 hours a weekend, 3 hours a day, 4 hours a day, something like that, producing projects. Build up your GitHub repo and just make a bunch of stuff so that when you go to get interviewed, you can talk about those things and what you were thinking in that process. When you're explaining that in an interview, you might come up with new ideas on how to solve it. So then you go back after the interview is done, you solve it. So then the next time you have another interview, they're going to be like, hey, tell me about a time when you had to solve a problem from something. Well, actually, I just had this interview and it reminded me that I have a serious problem in my project, and so on. Right. So you need to start building experience. So the degree in theory is there to show that you have experience of something. It shows that you can commit to something and finish something. But if you can show that in other ways, I think you should do that. Now, if you and I started talking, Nelson, and you were like, hey, Django's integration with Mongo is amazing. Immediately, no, this guy doesn't know Django. Django does not have a native integration with Mongo. But then I would actually ask some more questions. Oh yeah, what do you like about it? Oh well, I mean, then you'd be, oh, sorry, I didn't mean Django with Mongo. I meant Django. That's a cool package that I really like that I use with Django, and here's the reasons why. Ooh, then I know that you know what you're talking about a little bit, and that comes from practice, right? So that doesn't come from a degree; it comes from practice and building projects that you're really interested in or things that you've heard of. So yeah. Local trick. Yeah, years ago. I used to use that as my context because I don't know, I don't remember where I learned it, but I remember when I was learning where I learned it was actually taught to me. I think maybe from a friend that was a developer was like, "Oh yeah, just pass locals in as your context." Man, times have changed since then. But anyways, so yeah, thank you so much everyone for coming out and asking all the great questions. Had a really good time doing this. If you want to see these things more regularly, I need to know. Shoot me a tweet if you would prefer to do that. You can let me know on any video, literally any of my YouTube videos. Just say, hey, I would love to see more live chats where we can have these talks and stuff like that. Um, and also, if you're really interested in maybe I need to do like a more narrowed group where it's like we meet 10 of us, 20 of us every week. We meet and talk about a lot of the issues that you're having and maybe actually talk about things that you were having last week. That might be another thing that we talk about. So yeah, anyways, that's pretty much it. Yeah, thanks so much for watching and I'll see you guys next time. See ya.